Welcome to Nazir Fears, where fear finds you. Do you dare to enter a world of unspeakable horror and chilling mysteries?
Like, subscribe, share, and click that bell icon.
The Vanishing Light of Point Wilson, Lighthouse Point. Wilson Lighthouse, situated on the edge of the Puget Sound in Washington state, has long been a symbol of safety for sailors navigating the treacherous waters. Built in 1881, this lighthouse has stood the test of time, guiding countless ships away from the rocky shores and towards safe harbor. However, despite its role as a beacon of hope, there are whispers of a much darker history that has followed the lighthouse for generations. The story I'm about to share begins in 1927, a year that forever changed the course of the lighthouse's existence. This tale, passed down through generations of lighthouse keepers and locals, involves a strange series of events that left the once reliable beacon of light flickering out, never to shine again. It's a tale that involves eerie disappearances, strange visions, and a mysterious force that seemed to possess the lighthouse, one that was never fully understood. The keeper at Point Wilson Lighthouse in 1927 was a man named Harold Granger. He had been serving at the lighthouse for nearly a decade and was known for his dedication to his work. Granger was a man who respected the solitude the job provided. The lighthouse, situated in a remote part of the coastline, was not an ideal place for anyone seeking social interaction. However, it had been perfect for Granger, who had no family and preferred the company of his thoughts and the sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks. In the fall of that year, Harold had been experiencing something unsettling. Over the course of several nights, he had noticed that the light from the beacon seemed to behave unusually. It would flicker sporadically, not like the usual power failures he was accustomed to, but as though something was interfering with its function. Sometimes the light would go out completely, and he would find himself stumbling in the dark, trying to restart the lanterns, only to have them flicker back on after a few minutes. At first, Harold thought it was just wear and tear on the equipment, but as the days passed, things started to feel off. It began on a stormy night when Harold noticed the lighthouse light had not gone out, but rather it was being blocked by something. He had been inside the station, making his rounds, when he noticed something strange on the horizon. Through the rain-splattered windows, he thought he saw a figure standing in the distance, its shadow casting across the rocks near the base of the lighthouse. Thinking it was just a trick of the storm, Harold grabbed his oil lamp and went to investigate. However, when he reached the base, there was nothing. No figure, no footprints, just the relentless crashing of waves against the jagged rocks. Over the next few nights, the strange occurrences intensified. Harold could hear whispers in the wind as he climbed the narrow staircase to the top of the lighthouse. But when he reached the lantern room, no one was there. The sound would stop as soon as he reached the top, and yet every time he left the room, the whispers would start again. He attributed the whispers to the wind and the way the stormy weather carried sounds across the sound. But what really unsettled him was the consistent failure of the light. One evening, just after sunset, the light in the lantern room flickered and then went completely dark. Harold, now thoroughly spooked, climbed the stairs to find the source of the problem. He knew the equipment was old, but never had he seen it fail like this. Upon entering the Phantom Keeper of Cape Hatteras. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, located on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, is one of the tallest brick lighthouses in the United States. It has guided countless ships safely through the dangerous waters of the Atlantic Ocean for over 150 years. But for all its beauty and importance, The lighthouse has long been shrouded in mystery, particularly the story of the lighthouse keeper, Thomas McClellan, and the haunting that still plagues the station to this very day. Thomas McClellan was hired as the head keeper of Cape Hatteras Lighthouse in 1897, a year after the lighthouse had been fully automated. Before then, it had been manned by a team of keepers, each working in shifts to maintain the powerful light that guided vessels away from the treacherous sandbars and deadly shoals of the Outer Banks. McClellan had a reputation for being a dedicated worker, but even before his arrival at Cape Hatteras, whispers about his troubled past had started to follow him. His previous postings had been marked by mysterious disappearances and strange accidents that seemed to plague the men who worked alongside him. But the authorities overlooked these rumors, and McClellan was entrusted with the Cape Hatteras station. On his first night alone in the lighthouse, Thomas McClellan reported an unsettling feeling of unease. His quarters, which were attached to the lighthouse structure, were simple but cozy. The sounds of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below were comforting at first, but soon McClellan began to hear strange noises, low, guttural sounds that seemed to come from the walls themselves. His initial thoughts were that it was just the wind, but the noises persisted every night, growing louder and more insistent, as though something, or someone, was trying to communicate with him. Despite these disturbances, McClellan carried on with his duties. He climbed the spiral staircase to the top of the lighthouse each night to ensure the beacon was operating properly. But during these late-night rounds, he began to notice something unsettling. As he reached the top of the lighthouse tower, he swore that he could see figures in the distance, standing just outside the circle of light cast by the beacon. They were vague at first, just fleeting shadows, but each night they grew more distinct. McClellan's heartbeat would quicken, his breath shallow as he struggled to focus on the figures, only for them to vanish into the darkness as soon as the light passed over them. It wasn't long before McClellan began to question his own sanity. Had he truly seen something, or was the isolation of the lighthouse playing tricks on his mind? But things took a darker turn when he started seeing figures in the lighthouse itself. One night, while he was adjusting the light mechanism at the top of the tower, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, expecting to see one of the assistant keepers, but there was no one there. The room was empty. The eerie sensation that he wasn't alone became so overwhelming that he began to lock himself in the tower at night, unwilling to venture down to the station below. As the weeks passed, the disturbances escalated. McClellan began to experience vivid nightmares, waking in a cold sweat to the sound of the same heavy footsteps following him around the lighthouse. In these dreams, he would see a tall figure, dressed in the old-fashioned clothing of a former lighthouse keeper, standing at the base of the lighthouse, staring up at him. The figure's face was always obscured, but McClellan could feel its eyes burning into him. The final straw came on a stormy night in late October. A powerful nor'easter had swept in off the coast, its winds howling and waves crashing violently against the rocky shores. McClellan had been battling the storm all night, keeping the light shining against the ever-encroaching darkness. But as he climbed the stairs that night, he saw something he couldn't explain. At the top of the lighthouse, where the light should have been casting its usual beam across the sea, McClellan found the lens flickering. It was as though something was blocking the light, but there was no visible obstruction. The air grew frigid, and for the first time in weeks, McClellan heard the footsteps again, this time louder and faster, as if someone was running up the tower toward him. He turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs, its face still hidden. The figure was tall and seemed to be glowing faintly, as if illuminated by some unseen light. McClellan froze, his heart racing in his chest. The figure took a step forward and then, just as quickly, vanished into the wall. The lantern flared up again, its light piercing through the stormy night sky. But McClellan didn't stay to investigate further. He fled the tower and ran down the stairs, his feet slipping on the damp steps as he desperately tried to escape the presence that seemed to have taken over the lighthouse. By the time McClellan reached the base of the lighthouse, he was breathless and terrified. He bolted the door to his quarters and huddled in his bed, shaking uncontrollably. But the footsteps didn't stop. They seemed to echo through the entire lighthouse, moving from room to room. McClellan clutched his pillow tightly, trying to block out the sound. But it was no use. The footsteps grew louder, until finally there was a knock at his door. He opened the door to find nothing but a gust of cold wind. The storm had died down, but the eerie presence of the lighthouse seemed to linger in the air. McClellan, who had never been one to entertain superstition, could no longer deny that something was terribly wrong with the lighthouse. The next day, McClellan vanished without a trace. His colleagues and the local authorities launched a search, but there was no sign of him. His belongings were found in his quarters, and the light continued to shine without interruption. But McClellan was never seen again. There was no indication of foul play, and the storm that night had left no evidence of his disappearance. The lighthouse was fully operational when the next keeper arrived, and it was as if McClellan had never existed. Since then, there have been countless reports of strange phenomena at Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Visitors often report hearing footsteps echoing in the tower, and some claim to have seen a shadowy figure standing at the top of the lighthouse, staring out at the sea. Locals tell of hearing the sound of a voice calling out in the night, but when they investigate, no one is there. Some say the lighthouse keeper, Thomas McClellan, is still there, haunting the tower he once tended to, lost in time and trapped between the world of the living and the dead. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse continues to operate, its beam slicing through the dark waters of the Atlantic. But for those who know its history, the lighthouse is more than just a beacon for ships. It is a reminder that some places carry with them the weight of the past, haunted by the restless spirits of those who never truly left. The Curse of St. Augustine Lighthouse. The St. Augustine Lighthouse, located in Florida, is one of the oldest and most iconic lighthouses in the United States. It has guided countless ships along the treacherous coastlines of the Atlantic Ocean for over 150 years. While the lighthouse itself is a stunning piece of history, it is also the focal point of one of the most disturbing and tragic stories ever associated with a lighthouse. The tale of the St. Augustine Lighthouse and its curse begins with the story of Joseph Andrew, a young keeper who, in the early 1800s, was assigned to watch over the lighthouse. Joseph was just a boy when he was chosen to assist his father at the lighthouse. His father, William Andrew, had been a dedicated lighthouse keeper for years, and Joseph was eager to learn the ropes. The two of them lived in the small lighthouse keeper's quarters, isolated from the nearby town of St. Augustine. The only company they had were the occasional sailors who passed through and the ever-present sound of the crashing waves against the rocks below. Life was quiet, but never dull, for a lighthouse keeper's job was one that required constant attention and vigilance. On a particularly stormy night, a terrible accident would forever alter the course of Joseph's life. The storm that night was unlike any the lighthouse had ever seen. The winds howled ferociously, and the waves pounded against the cliffs with such force that the lighthouse's foundation shook. As the storm raged on, William Andrew sent Joseph to the lighthouse tower to check the light, which had begun to flicker. It was crucial that the light stayed on during the storm to guide ships safely away from the dangerous coastline. Joseph ascended the narrow stairs to the top of the lighthouse, feeling the weight of the storm pressing down on him. The winds outside seemed to scream in fury, and the lightning illuminated the sky, casting strange shadows on the walls of the tower. As he reached the top, he found the light dimming, its usual bright beacon barely visible. The storm had weakened the mechanical system that powered the lanterns, and Joseph struggled to get the light working again. Just as he adjusted the controls, a violent gust of wind burst through the tower window, shattering the glass and forcing him off balance. The storm seemed to come alive, its power overwhelming. As Joseph regained his footing, he reached for the lantern, only to have the light extinguish completely. Desperate to keep the flame going, Joseph attempted to relight it. However, just as he was about to strike the match, the tower was struck by a bolt of lightning, sending a surge of energy through the metal structure. In that instant, Joseph's life was changed forever. The blast from the lightning knocked him off his feet, sending him tumbling down the narrow stairs of the lighthouse. He landed hard on the floor, unconscious. When he awoke, he was alone in the tower. His father, William, had disappeared, and the lighthouse was eerily silent. Joseph searched the lighthouse for his father, but there was no sign of him. He rushed outside into the storm, calling out for his father. The wind drowned out his cries, and the torrential rain made it impossible to see. As he searched along the rocky coastline, Joseph stumbled upon something horrifying: the lifeless body of his father, washed up on the shore. He had been struck by the same lightning bolt that had knocked Joseph unconscious. The storm had claimed his life. Grief-stricken and alone, Joseph was forced to take over his father's duties as the lighthouse keeper. The tragedy, however, seemed to have marked the lighthouse with a strange and unsettling presence. As Joseph carried out his work, he began to hear strange sounds at night, whispers that echoed through the tower, the sounds of footsteps climbing the stairs when no one was there. Some nights, the lighthouse light would flicker, just as it had the night of his father's death, as if the tower itself was alive, remembering the horrible events. The curse of the St. Augustine Lighthouse did not end with Joseph's father. After his tragic death, a new keeper arrived, Thomas Hargrove, who would later be tasked with maintaining the lighthouse. But as Thomas began his tenure, he too began to experience strange and unexplained phenomena. Thomas reported hearing loud banging noises in the middle of the night, and sometimes the lighthouse would shake violently, as though something, or someone, was trying to break in. It wasn't long before locals began to notice something unsettling about the lighthouse. They said they could see strange lights flickering in the tower on stormy nights, even though the light was supposed to be automated. Sailors passing by would sometimes report seeing figures in the windows of the lighthouse at odd hours, figures that appeared to be watching the horizon. But when the ships drew closer, the lighthouse appeared empty. Those who worked at the nearby docks claimed they heard strange sounds coming from the tower at night, like the echo of a man's voice or the ringing of a bell. But when they investigated, the lighthouse was always locked and deserted. Over the years, stories spread of a ghostly figure in the tower, a figure that appeared to be the spirit of a lighthouse keeper trapped in the tower for eternity. Some said it was Joseph Andrew, still mourning his father's death and unable to escape the curse that had befallen the lighthouse. Others believed it was William Andrew's restless spirit, forever wandering the tower looking for his son. Still, others said the spirit was a mix of both men, forever bound to the lighthouse and cursed to continue their work in death as they had in life. Locals who lived near the lighthouse would often report hearing the faint sound of a bell tolling from the top of the tower, even though no bell had ever been installed. They also spoke of seeing strange lights and shadows moving behind the windows at night, despite the fact that the lighthouse was officially closed to the public after dark. The rumors of the haunting reached a peak when a group of paranormal investigators visited the St. Augustine Lighthouse in the early 2000s. Equipped with infrared cameras, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon recorders, and motion detectors, the team spent an entire night inside at the lighthouse, hoping to capture evidence of the spirits that haunted it. What they found was chilling. Throughout the night, their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, and several members of the team reported hearing whispers and footsteps behind them, even though the space was empty. One investigator swore that they saw a shadowy figure standing at the top of the staircase, watching them, before it disappeared into the darkness. Perhaps the most unnerving discovery was the recording of a voice on their EVP recorder. The voice, a low and mournful whisper, could clearly be heard saying, "Help me, I'm still here." The investigators were certain they had captured the voice of a ghost, most likely the spirit of one of the lighthouse keepers who had tragically perished. Despite these findings, the lighthouse remains an active site for paranormal activity, with many visitors and workers alike claiming to feel an eerie presence as they walk through its corridors. The St. Augustine Lighthouse, still standing tall on the Florida coastline, is now a historic site and popular tourist destination. But for those who know its history, it's also a reminder of the terrible events that have left a curse on the place, a curse that continues to haunt the lighthouse to this very day. To this day, the lighthouse still stands, its beam shining over the Atlantic Ocean, but locals still talk about the mysterious voices and lights, and the ghostly figures that appear in the tower. Some believe the spirits of Joseph and William Andrew have never left, still keeping watch over the lighthouse as they did in life, trapped in a never-ending cycle of duty and death.